Welcome to Feminist Founders, a podcast that explores how to create a more equitable world through entrepreneurship. I'm your host, coach and journalist, Becky Mollenkamp. Feminist Founders is a listener-funded podcast. Your contributions enable me to continue bringing you these important conversations without corporate advertising. To support the mission, head to feministfounderspodcast.com and sign up for a paid subscription. The link is in the show notes. Now, on to today's show. Three seasons in the books for Feminist Founders, and this has been an amazing journey. This is the last episode of season 3, and I'm so thankful for you listening and joining me. And I'm here to share a special episode because things are changing in 2025. And I'm very excited for what these changes mean. Faith Clarke, a good friend who has become a good friend since actually being a guest on this show. I didn't know her when I approached her to be a guest on the show in season 2. Go back and listen. And we developed a friendship that then has now developed into a business partnership. She will be joining as a co-owner of Feminist Founders in 2025. We will be working together on content, on the direction for the show, for the direction of the newsletter. And I couldn't be more excited to bring Faith into the fold and be a part of this. Not only does it obviously help with capacity, right? Having two people instead of one working on things allows us to do more, but it also allows for a greater breadth of knowledge. Faith comes from the DEIB world and more corporate experience than I have, and different lived experiences. We have very different experiences of how the world views us and how we interact with the world. And I think that's going to be such a wonderful complement and addition to what I do with Feminist Founders and what we now do with Feminist Founders. And I can't wait. And so to sort of bring you into the fold, I am sharing with you today a conversation with Faith because with the newsletter and the membership, the community, I think of it more than a newsletter. It's a community we're building with Feminist Founders over on Substack. And for those who decide to join us on that journey, next year is going to look very different. We will be doing monthly live events that I can't wait to have you be a part of, where we will be bringing together community of entrepreneurs and founders to talk about really important issues in a way that is really affirming and fulfilling and rewarding. And I think Faith will be a big part of that because she's so good at holding space. So that will be a big change that's coming next year, is live events every month for our paid subscribers at any level of being a paid subscriber. And also we will be doing a private podcast. There's already a private podcast, so you may be listening to it in that feed or on the regular feed. But next year, the private podcast will be growing. There will be much more regular content coming, both from Faith and I individually. But what I'm most excited about is Faith and I will be doing conversations together for the private podcast at least once a month. And those will be peeling back the curtain a little so you get some insider scoop of what it's like for us to develop this partnership, to work together in partnership, and also what our minds are thinking about when it comes to business and feminism and equity and social justice. And so you'll be getting those sort of in the moment, real-time conversations that will be a little bit behind the scenes, a little bit thought leadership on issues that matter to you. And we're going to start today giving you the first one for free, so you get a taste of what that's going to look and sound like in the year ahead. And if you enjoy this, if you're excited about the live events, if you're excited about more content coming, if you want to be part of finding community with other founders who care about equity and social justice as much as you do, I really invite you to join us as a paid subscriber. Hop over to Substack. The link is in the show notes or in the description if you're watching this on YouTube, where you can come and join us. If you sign up before the end of 2024, so depending on when you're listening to this, you can get in at legacy pricing as it exists now before the rates go up next year. And I just want to also quickly note, you can join monthly, you can join annually and pay in advance, which saves you money. Or if you join as a founding member, you get an additional benefit beyond the community events, beyond the private podcast feed. You will also get a mention in our monthly newsletter, or once a month in the newsletter. You will be mentioned, your company, your website. And that's going out to more than 3,000 subscribers at this point, and that continues to grow. And you'll be locked in for a year to get those. So those 12 mentions, the marketing value behind that, it's actually for only an additional, I think it's $50. It's an additional $25 if you do it now. It'll be even more if you wait until next year. And the marketing value of that is obviously very big. So we invite you to check out the membership community to be a part of what we're building with Feminist Founders. And I hope you enjoy this little sneak peek of what is to come next year in the private podcast feed for our paid community members. So here's a conversation between Faith and I. And also just to say thank you. No matter whether you are a paid member or not, thank you for being a part of the Feminist Founders world, for listening to the podcast, maybe reading the newsletter, however you're consuming this information. I appreciate you, and I just invite you in to become more active in this community we're building, because we want to build it together and collectively, and that means we need you to do that with us. So we hope you'll join us in 2025 and have a wonderful end of your year.
Good morning, Faith. How are you?
That's a great question. Let me check in.
I know. I forgot. I can't ask Faith, how are you? Because you like to be
I'm going to answer.
Very honest, which I appreciate very much. And I know we only have a limited time. So maybe instead of asking, how are you? Here's what I'm going to ask instead.
Yeah.
What's in your mind that we want to talk about?
I love a specific question. Question. My son is on my mind. My oldest, with autism, today is his birthday, and I was induced. It's a whole, every year I rehearse birth stories with my kids on their birthday. But I think today is also International Day of, I think, the day to end violence for women or something. The beginning of like a period of activism that goes into December, worldwide. And so this reflection on violence, I had a client last year, a nonprofit organization in Jamaica, that their work was, this particular project was about gender-based violence. And so I had the opportunity to think about it a little bit, and perhaps even to think about it in relation to how I want to protect my kids. And so I guess today I'm thinking about my son, thinking about posts I want to write about, violence not being something, violence against women, but violence as a response to fear and anger in our bodies. Fear and anger are both just normal human emotions. So then violence, this intent to harm, not necessarily something that shows up as physical abuse, but this violence is something that we all are at risk of perpetuating. And I think that's important to me, because it's really easy for my self-righteousness to other people who end up in situations that are violent, who are perpetuating violence. It is them and their problem. They're the deviants. I am different. And I think when we, especially in our context of, feminist founders and in our businesses, it's super easy for us to say, because we're in this group, we are not them. And we are therefore, exempt from being perpetuators out there. And it is the absolute guaranteed way for us to perpetuate the same things that we are stepping away from. So when I think about my son, I think about his vulnerability to violence, to being harmed because of his multiple marginalized identities, because of his disability. I guess I'm just asking myself and asking us as business people, like, how are the ways, what do we believe about, like, how are we managing and navigating fear in ways that help us to own our vulnerability to being this perpetuator of violence, and like, what do we need to do with ourselves and in our businesses? And so anyway, I'm just flipping over to you. As I think as women, we both experience a fair amount of fear and anger about the systems, about people,
especially right now, right?
Right?
With the election of Trump, I think all of us are feeling it even more acutely, especially as white women. And, that's the perspective I obviously come into the conversation with as a white-bodied person. Like, I recognize, and I think it's been really important, honestly, the conversation's been happening since the election, of this reminder that I have this threat, this feeling of this threat of violence and the potential for that I haven't experienced. And I think white women in general are feeling that, like we're feeling all this weight of it. And the wonderful reminder from Black women too, who are saying like, welcome to it, right? Like, yeah. And it only seems acute when it's yours, but it feels aligned with what you're saying of like, I think white women, and this has been my experience, is like the real feeling of this wanting to separate ourselves, othering ourselves from other white women. No, but I'm one of the good white women, that whole thing, which keeps us really problematic. And I just think it's so important to get to that place of saying, I can't continue to say, oh, those white women who voted for Trump. It is white women who voted for Trump, and I am a white woman. And so what does that mean? Right. And how do I then recognize that I am not other from that? I am that. Yeah. Even if I didn't vote for Trump, I am that. And what does that mean? And what's my responsibility then because of that? At least that's sort of what I'm hearing when you're talking about that feeling of like, we have to do that internal investigation, because as soon as we allow ourselves to other ourselves from it, whatever it is, then we no longer feel like we have any responsibility, right? Because if I can say, well, I'm not one of those white women, then I no longer have any responsibility as a white woman to help collectively change white women. And I need that responsibility or it won't happen.
Yeah. And I think when we think about violence against women, then we have to think about our own violence against ourselves, right? So, where are we complicit? Because anything I'm doing to self, I'm quite willing to do to other. And so this whole, what's faith's violence against faith self? This perpetual not drinking of water. And I don't want to be like minimalistic, but you know what I mean? There's a way that I will abandon myself, and then I'm going to judge the closer you get to me. And especially if you're working in my business, and my business is the way that I feed my children, then when the rubber hits the road, I'm going to expect a certain kind of self-abandonment from you too. If I believe that self-abandonment is the way I feed my children, therefore violence, my response to fear, the fear of not being able to feed my children, is self-abandonment, right? Then I'm going to expect that of the people who work with me. I have staff in my home that work with my son, and I'm just like, as I notice my reactions to things that they do or don't do, I'm just kind of processing that. Where is that coming out of fear? And am I asking them to do something that feels like violence to them? And how do I? Because because of how we've been taught to do business, then it's like, I'm the boss. You should do what I say, right? And so when does that belief and that kind of implementation become violence? And how do we balance that with our actual business goals? Yeah, no, those are not straightforward answers. But it does require humans to kind of be honest and authentic with each other. So I'm just kind of, when am I abandoning myself? When am I in my mental chatter, reprimanding myself for being human? When am I like all of those things? That's me. I'm self. This self is woman. Right? So when I'm doing that, that's violence again. It's just like a humility, I think, in acknowledging how complicit I am and how much I perpetuate that. And then how much I accept it, because if it's normal in my own head, then of course I am super loyal. So then I will just jump up and be doing the self-abandonment in pursuit of other people's goals for their business or their work, or, I can't tell you how much abandoning.
And I would love to bring it to this partnership and to this business that we're now going to be building together, that I've been building for a year and a half. We're going to start building it together, because I can feel that. Like, I know this has been my journey big time as a white woman. My journey has really been trying to learn how to be very, very introspective and start to notice things. What am I feeling in my body? What am I thinking? What is my gut, like sort of my knee-jerk reaction to things? And so much of it, I realize, is so deeply, and I think it's for all of us, but like that deep conditioning I have, where I can find quickly in business all the ways that all this really violent, harmful, capitalist conditioning shows up in me. So like with this relationship, I have to like my immediate sort of when you ask, like, even though I immediately felt in my body this like, oh yeah, let's work together. There was also my brain starts clicking in right away with, but will it still be yours? Will you still be in charge? Like all of these, right? All that capitalist thinking of like, okay, well then who's the boss and how's that going to show up? And what about the money? You know, all of that stuff. And I have to be able to be embodied and introspective enough. And I feel like I'm having to, like, this is the emotional labor of this work that I don't think talk about enough, that I am having to do that work constantly, listening for that, checking it, like tending to my body and the ways that it starts to go into those natural automatic defenses, those white supremacist defensive mode, right? I'm having to do that constantly. And I've had to do it just in the like couple of weeks that we've been exploring what will this look like and having to check myself and be like, the reminder that that's not how I want to show up. I don't want to show up where we're having like to track who's contributing what. How many minutes did you spend and I spent? How many dollars are you directly responsible for and I am for? All of that. Like that is not how I want to show up. But I do it to myself. I force myself to work too much. I force myself to get so fixated on metrics and all of these things. I can feel myself judging my worth based on those things that of course I will do it to another if I don't start to internally recognize it and slow down, tend to myself and say, how do I actually want to show up here? What do I want to look like? And it can't just be us. It has to be myself too.
Right. I think so. There are two things here, right? Because like we're all in this water of racist, ideology, right? So I have racist thoughts and I have misogynistic thoughts and or ideas. And I think one of the things is proximity to whiteness. Within the idea of white supremacy is this perfection. We're going to do it the right way, right? And so owning the fact that no, actually, violence is perpetuated by this idea that there is a single right way and somebody knows it. And I should be the one that knows it, that I know it. And so how do I relax and let that go and be gracious in our usness? Now we're going to figure stuff out. We're going to make mistakes. And as we make mistakes, we're going to fix them and we'll move closer to what we need to be doing. And that's kind of like how humans have stayed on the planet alive, the ones that have stayed alive, So that was the first thought. And, the second thought was that violence thrives in the dark. And so as you have that thought, I guess my invitation to you and to myself is, as we have those thoughts about, this other, the devil on one side, whichever side the devil is, that we can bring that voice out and let that voice is like, hey, I know I'm having this thought. I know it's not, I know where it is, but I'm just going to say these are the fears because there's such closeness between those thoughts and where we want to be. And when we hide it, then we get closer to the self-violence and we don't actually get into the collective wisdom, which is the stuff I'm into. There is wisdom that's between us that I don't have access to, that you don't have access to, but that we have access to. And and that collective wisdom is the place where we can protect each other from the violence.
Well, here, this is some good behind the scenes stuff then, because I will tell you that just yesterday, 2 days ago, something like that, I was shower thoughts, thinking about the partnership and what that looks like. And then there was the voice started to come up and it was saying things like, well, Faith has said she's committed to like a year and let's see how things go. And like, that all makes sense. But there's that voice in my head going, but Becky, you better protect yourself. And do you guys need a contract? And what about who retains ownership of this venture, right? If it doesn't work out, and all of these thoughts started to come up of like, that aren't how I want to show up in the world, that aren't what we've talked about, aren't how I want to be. But I could hear them coming up and having to like, I was sitting there having these conversations with myself of like, but Becky, that's not how you want to show up in the world. I trust Faith and I don't need the like lawyer voice sowing seeds of distrust that I don't want to be there and that I don't have. And yet like that that voice. Like, you can't just pretend that it's not there. And I try to work through these things on my own, I think, because, like, I could bring that to you. I am now because you encouraged it. So people are getting to hear it. But I think there's a big part of me that feels like I want to work through those things alone, because I think there's some shame in saying it aloud, even though I know there shouldn't be, right? Like, my intellectual brain kicks in with, of course, there's no shame in that. And of course you think that way. And of course, but part of me must be like, I just want to work through it on my own, in the dark, in the quiet, not tell Faith, because I don't want her to think less of me. I don't want her to I don't want those seeds of distrust or doubt to grow. But you're right. They probably grow more when I keep them in the dark than if I bring them out into the light. So I don't know.
They grow, but even if they don't grow, the cognitive load, the efforting required to keep them quiet and to keep the argument in there, it's like they have measurable performance. One of the teamwork things, like there's measurable performance gaps, because for especially if you have a marginalized identity and you're kind of trying to protect, I don't want to look like that Black person. I don't want to look like that white woman. Just whatever it is, that stops us from being able to be effective together, because you're spending, whatever they calculated it somehow. And I feel like part of this is that our voices need some tending, so wherever that voice first showed up, I don't know, 8-year-old Becky, 10-year-old Becky, whatever.
Probably younger. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's hear what she was about, and let's give her some space and let her know that, yeah, but we got this. We hear you and we're going to keep you safe. And I see, because I think there's something about even us as we kind of move into this work, like, no, I'm not going to be that way. I'm like, yeah, but I am already that way. My therapist said, by the time you say I'm not going to be like my mother, you already are. So then how do we tend?
Do not say that, Faith. I love you, Mom.
So how do we
He's one of our paid subscribers, so she'll hear it.
Hey, Mom. So how do we tend to, the reason that voice is there, and then tend to it in the ways that align with the values we want to have,
Well, it goes back to what you're saying at the beginning for me, that the dots that are kind of connecting for me right now, which is talking about this violence, and we have to deal with it internally. And I'm starting with that conversation by talking about being a white woman and not wanting to separate myself from white women, and really trying to learn how I am, whether I voted for Trump or not. I am part of that collective group, and it is part of my responsibility in that privileged, oppressive identity to be a part of changing that group. Like, that feels like a responsibility to me that if I'm othering myself, I'm not going to take on, right? However, here I am in the shower trying to other myself, basically, by saying, oh, but that's not how I want to show up. That's not who I am, right? And trying to sort of suppress that thought that is a natural, I don't want to say natural, that is a conditioned thought, but feels natural at this point because it's been my basically entire life's conditioning. And I'm sort of trying to push that away and other myself again. And I think I've always thought of the ways I've had to mask based on my marginalized identities, right? Showing up in straight spaces as a queer woman, showing up in male-dominated spaces as a woman, and the ways that I've had to kind of mask, more increasingly realizing I have some neurodivergence, ADHD, and how I've had to mask. So recognizing those ways that I've masked to be perceived in the way I want to be perceived in those spaces and treated with the amount of respect I'd like to be treated. But I don't think I've realized the ways that that I've masked in my oppressor identities.
Yeah.
And that's all of it. All of that masking is violence on myself, ultimately, right? I think in the way you're talking about it. And so it's just very interesting for me to think about, and can I encourage myself, because I think I've been more apt to want to remove the mask on the oppressed identities than I have been willing to remove the mask on the oppressor identities, which makes sense, right? Because it's that one, it feels a lot easier in a way to be with other folks who have marginalized identities and find that bond than it does to be willing to say, I also have this oppressor identity. And instead of trying to mask and be oh no, that's not me, I'm exceptional. No, it is. And can I get vulnerable and just share it when it's happening real time? That's been hard. Like, that is something I have kept in the shadows of when all of those thoughts come up, because I don't want them to be me.
Yeah.
That I'm doing all of that work internally, and the idea of removing that mask, because that's the same thing I'm doing, right? When we're masking our oppressed identities, we're doing all this behind the scenes work, right? Right. And I'm doing it in the same way with this other identity. And I don't know that I've really explored that. So this is very interesting to think about. The work that I'm doing internally, can I bring it outside? It scares me.
And the thing is that this is all about safety, right? Which goes back to fear, right? So it is about us having space and place to unmask, knowing fully well that your wise self, the masking is a tool of your wise self saying, it's hella crazy out there. Wait, like, put the mask on, because those people out there can't be trusted with your real self, right? And so it's even just to honor that it's our wise self that's doing that. So then how do we create the space we need back to our community that we're trying to form here? We're not going to get it perfect, but we want to then just have spaces where unmasking becomes a practice, and then space where we can help each other learn the skills of being with our unmasked selves. Because it's unsafe, because when we unmask, people are like, and then they're like, you, and then the other, and then you do all the things, right? So
that's it, the being with others unmasked too, because going back to what you said at the beginning too about that violence, because if I'm treating myself that way, if I'm not dealing with that, then when I see someone else take that mask off, I'm going to be quick to judge, because I'm doing it all over here in the dark and no one's seen it. So now you're showing me that I'm going to be like, oh, look at her. I'm better than her. I don't think those things, but of course I still think those things.
Right.
Yeah.
And so part of all of this doesn't work. And we talk about change in society and in workplaces. None of this works without us kind of just owning all our stuff. And then kind of being with the self that we are with humility, and then doing our incremental, like, yes, this is me. And, I want to build a bridge to you, and I want to be able to see you, but I need to see myself. And this work of, and then tending the bridge together. And it's like, that shows up. That's the real thing that shows up. And I think especially through the lens of our power identities, we will not be able to nourish people with marginalized identities from the position of our power identity if we can't look at our power identities. So as neurodivergent as I may be, you can't have 3 kids who have variations, neurodistinctiveness, and not be likely as their biological mother. But I am quite neurotypical passing, right? So that's a power identity. And I will not be able to support, advocate, hold space well if I'm not able to look at the power that is, and therefore acknowledge the blind spots. Like, if I keep on about it, deflecting, I will never see the blind spots. That's why they talk about fragility. I think it's, what's her name? Sonia Renee Taylor just talks about fragility as every power identity has a fragility. So it's not, it's fragile. So it's not just, it's not white fragility. Yes, there is white fragility, but I'm fragile through the lens of my power. And to own that fragility, I have to be able to look at it. Otherwise, I perpetuate violence through it. Like, that's, I'm the bull in the china.
Well, the piece that's coming through for me, because I do, and I can feel like maybe this is me also trying to be exceptional here, but I swear I do look at these things, right? Because I'm in the shower and I'm taking it out of my head. I'm sitting here examining it 360, and like, I'm doing all of this work, but I'm doing it all alone. And that is the piece that, for me, of what you're saying, I think is really powerful. Because I think for some people, it's like earlier in this stage, earlier in this process, I think is like even learning to confront it in yourself. But I feel like maybe I'm reaching a place of the next, I don't want to say next level. That makes it sound again like I'm exceptional, but just as the journey of this feels like the invitation of what could it look like to explore it collectively with others. I mean, again, with safety, all things with safety, but like, I trust you. I feel safe with you. I feel safe with Taina. Like, I have spaces where I feel safe. And yet I still think I'm not, I talk about the issues, but I don't know if I'm talking about them. I feel like I'm talking about after I've done that, right? Yeah. Instead of saying, hey, in real time, can we explore this thing together? Before I have it, perfected before I've gotten to the place where I feel ready to talk about it. Because I think that's been more historically how I've shown up. Like I've done all of the examining, but I've done it all alone. And now I feel safe because I feel like I've got it perfect to talk about. And can I allow myself more vulnerability to say I can be in community with those that I trust, but to say, hey, I'm going to welcome you into this process where I feel really raw and really vulnerable.
Yeah.
That feels scary, but also exciting.
Yeah, no, I think we crave being witnessed, you know, and the witnessing is not just, you done good, but it's just kind of seen, right? And so while we're busy hiding our flaws because we think our warts look terrible, we do want them to be witnessed. And it's so powerful when we're with people who just, just see us and love us. So,
yeah.
And then maybe all of this is the wrap up that, to end violence against women, we need to kind of, the solution is self-love. And it sounds so cliched, but it's self-love and then loving community, right? And I remember thinking that I wanted to know my butcher because I don't think the butcher who knows me will poison my children. I think that's the thing. It's not a white, black, or whatever the thing is. It's that if I am known and witnessed, then you will protect my children. And so when I belong with you and to you, you look out for me. And I think that's kind of what we're craving.
Yes. And I'm excited. This is just sort of the initial conversation about this, but I would like to dig deeper, whether it's next month or whenever. But I'm excited to talk even more. But what does that mean inside of workspaces then for like our community of people who are generally small founders, whether they're in a business of one, and that's that, like, I think that piece of where are you allowing yourself to be violent to yourself in your workspace, in your work experience, but then also those who have teams, and what does it look like to rethink things, like rethink this, like ways that we're being violent and how do we do it differently? Because I think we're just scratching the surface here, and I think there's probably a lot more. So I'm excited to go into that some more of like, what does it look like then in work? Because immediately I think about just how much we work. But I know there's more than that. So I'm excited to talk about that.
How much we work, there is how we work, and of course how we respond to how the other works. And so
right. Yeah. So maybe next month, maybe some other time, or maybe you on one of your solo episodes for the private podcast feed. But I want to continue that thread because this has been really great for me to start encouraging myself, and I hope for everyone to say, like, what work am I willing to do out of the shadows? Where can I do that with safety? And just to, not to be too salesy here, but I'm just going to finish this up by saying, these are the kinds of conversations we're going to be having all year in the private podcast feed for our paid subscribers, where we just talk about what we're thinking about and how it applies to business, how it applies to our relationship. So if you're interested in that, make sure you upgrade before the end of the year because rates are going up in 2025 as this partnership officially gets underway. So make sure you upgrade if you haven't already because those rates will be going up. And my hope is that the community events that we're going to be hosting monthly, again, for our paid community, will be giving us a place to start to explore some of this. Like, what does a violent-free community experience look like, right? And how can we create spaces where people can explore some of these issues in that safety or that feeling of, collective vulnerability, witnessing.
Yep. Yeah. All the good stuff.
Well, yeah. Thank you for this conversation, Faith.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Feminist Founders podcast. If you like what you heard and want to learn more, or if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing with the show, please visit feministfounderspodcast.com. There you can find out about becoming a paid subscriber for as little as the price of 1 cup of coffee a month, which will directly support my work. Thanks again, and I can't wait for our next episode.